Sir, your helicopter is going to explode. The little girl's voice sliced through the air like a razor. Arthur Sterling didn't even look back. Street kids were part of the New York City landscape, as invisible as fire hydrants. But then she screamed something that made his blood run cold. The bolt on the left engine is loose. The smoke will come from there first. Arthur froze. How could a homeless child possibly know that? Upbeat, intriguing music starts. A graphic overlay appears. Text on screen. This is just the beginning of a story that will blow your mind. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Your like helps us a ton. Thanks for the support. Music fades. The story resumes. At 45, Arthur Sterling lived 1,500 feet above the common world. His office occupied the top floor of Sterling Tower, a skyscraper of glass and steel that pierced the clouds over Manhattan. It wasn't just the tallest building in the city, it was a phallic symbol of his absolute power. He didn't just run an investment and tech empire, he dominated it with the cold precision of an algorithm. For Arthur, emotions were system errors, variables that corrupted the purity of data. People were divided into two categories: assets that generated value or liabilities that drained resources. And on that Thursday afternoon, he was cutting a particularly expensive liability. Richard, your last quarter's results were unacceptable. Arthur didn't even look up from his tablet, where complex graphs danced in red. The smell of stale coffee permeated the conditioned air. Your projections had a 7% margin of error. In my world, Richard, 7% isn't a margin. It's an abyss. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. The kind of silence that precedes executions. You have 30 days to clear out your office. Across the 30-foot glass desk, Richard Peterson turned pale. Mid-50s, 2 decades dedicated to the company, and it all ended like this. In 30 seconds. Arthur, please. My family, my kids are in college. Your personal affairs do not factor into my spreadsheets. Arthur finally looked up. His eyes were icy gray, eyes that reflected nothing but pure logic. Thank you for your services. This was how he operated. No sentiment, no regret. It was this ruthless discipline that had transformed him from an ambitious young coder into the financial titan he was today. But success had extracted its price in flesh and blood. His wife had left him 3 years ago, tired of competing with quarterly earnings for his time and attention. His daughter Madison, studying in Paris, barely spoke to him. Birthday calls lasted less than 2 minutes. Loneliness was a tax he willingly paid for the privilege of being at the top of the food chain. His phone chimed. The soft sound contrasted with the tension still hanging in the air. It was Beatrice Hayes, his 38-year-old executive assistant, a woman as efficient and devoid of emotion as he was. Sir, the helicopter is ready. Her voice had the professional neutrality he appreciated. The pilot reports the replacement part for the tail rotor has arrived, but he recommends a test flight before your trip to the Hamptons tomorrow. Negative. Beatrice. Arthur was already gathering his things, his mind calculating probabilities. There's no time for test flights. Tell him to install the part and prepare for takeoff at 5 p.m. as planned. I have a 6:30 meeting that cannot be moved. He drummed his fingers on the desk, a rare sign of impatience. Safety protocols are overestimated. The probability of failure is 0.012%. It's unacceptable to postpone a $100 million negotiation for such a low probability. Yes, sir, Beatrice never questioned, as Arthur prepared for his trip 1,500 feet below, at street level where the smell of diesel mixed with roasted nuts from a street cart. A little girl named Lily knew a different kind of probability. The probability of finding enough food for herself and her older brother, Leo. The probability of not being chased away by the cops like rats. The probability of their mother, feverish in a cramped rental in the Bronx, surviving another night. Lily was only 5, but her brown eyes had already seen things no child should see. Sitting on the cold step of a service entrance, she hugged her thin knees while Leo, 12, tried to get a gig handing out flyers. Stay here, Lilybug. Don't you move for anything, you hear? Leo's voice had that protective tone that kids forced to grow up too fast develop. I'll be right back with money for Mom's medicine. But Lily was restless. A strange feeling, like a tingling at the back of her neck, scared her. An image flashed in her mind, insistent as a pop song. It was a metal bird, big and loud, with fire and black smoke pouring from one side. She could feel the heat, hear the screams. She didn't know what it was, but she knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that it was bad. Very bad. When she saw a man in a janitor's uniform pushing a cleaning cart into the giant building she was sitting in front of, an irresistible impulse took over. The image in her head grew sharper, more urgent. Without thinking, seizing a moment when the doorman was distracted, she slipped inside the colossal lobby. The inside of Sterling Tower was like a cathedral to an unknown god. The ceilings were impossibly high, the air was cold, and everything gleamed with a painful artificial brightness. Lily, in her worn-out sandals and faded dress, was a smudge of raw reality in a world of corporate abstraction. No one noticed her. She was too small, too insignificant. She saw a sign that read service elevators, and without knowing why, felt she needed to go up, to the top. She got into an elevator with a maintenance crew. No one asked her anything. When they got off on an intermediate floor, she stayed, her fingers trembling as she pushed the only button that looked different, PH. The elevator went up, and up and up. Meanwhile, Arthur walked toward the private elevator that would take him to the helipad. Beatrice followed, running through the final meeting details. The initial offer is 90 million, but my analysts indicate they're prepared to go to 110. I suggest opening at 120 to create a comfortable margin. Excellent, Beatrice. Do what you do best. Arthur's mind was already in the meeting, running scenarios, anticipating objections. The elevator ascended in silence, a cocoon of glass and steel transporting him to his kingdom in the sky. When the doors opened, the thump-thump-thump of the helicopter blades slowly turning filled the air. The pilot was already in the cockpit running final checks. The afternoon sun beat down on the helipad's asphalt, creating a blinding glare that made Arthur squint. It was Beatrice who saw her first. "Sir, what is that?" Arthur followed her gaze. Near the access stairs, huddled like a frightened animal, was a little girl, a street kid here on his private helipad. 500 feet in the air. The impossibility of the scene was so great that for a moment he thought he was hallucinating. "Security!" Beatrice yelled into her wrist communicator, her voice sharp with panic. "We have a breach on the helipad." "Code red!" Seeing the two of them approaching with brisk steps, Lily felt a paralyzing fear. But the image in her head was stronger now, clearer. The metal bird exploding. The fire, the smoke. She knew with a certainty that didn't come from her 5-year-old mind that she had to warn the man in the suit. "Sir, don't get in," she shouted, her small voice nearly lost in the noise of the blades. "Please." Arthur stopped, irritation etched on his face. How the hell did this child get up here? It was an unacceptable security failure. Heads would roll for this. Get this child out of here. "Beatrice, now, I'm late." Two burly security guards ran up the emergency stairs, moving quickly toward Lily. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete. "No!" Lily screamed, her voice filled with desperation. "It's going to blow up. The helicopter's going to explode." The words hung in the air, absurd, surreal. The pilot, hearing the scream through the cockpit glass, laughed. Beatrice looked at Arthur with an expression that clearly said, "This has to be a joke." Arthur felt a wave of fury. Was this a threat? Some sick prank? Child terrorism? "Get her out of here," he ordered the guards, who grabbed Lily's skinny arms with professional firmness. "Wait!" Lily shrieked with all the force of her small lungs as she was dragged away. Tears streamed down her dirty face. The fear in her eyes was so genuine, so visceral, that for a split second, Arthur's irritation gave way to a sliver of doubt. She struggled, her wide eyes fixed on him, and then she said it. "The bolt on the left engine is loose. The smoke will come from there first. Please, mister, don't go." Arthur Sterling's world stopped. It wasn't the warning. It was the detail. The bolt on the left engine. How? How could a 5-year-old girl, an illiterate street kid, invent such a specific technical detail? It wasn't, "The engine will catch fire." It was the bolt on the left engine. The precision of the information was a missile that pierced his armor of logic and skepticism. His supercomputer of a mind crashed. The probability of a random child inventing that specific phrase was infinitesimal, so low that it became in itself a statistically significant piece of data. A piece of data that could not be ignored. "Stop." His voice cut through the air like a whip. The guards froze, confused, still holding the crying girl. "Sir, we can't be late," Beatrice urged, her voice tense, the tablet trembling in her hands. The girl is obviously disturbed. "We need to—" "What did she say?" Arthur interrupted, ignoring Beatrice completely. His grey eyes were locked on the guards. She said something about a bolt on the left engine, sir." One of the guards was clearly embarrassed, as if reporting something ridiculous. Arthur looked at the helicopter, then at the girl, then back at the helicopter. His mind, that supercomputer trained to calculate risk in milliseconds, was stuck on an impossible equation. Delaying the trip meant financial risk, a potential loss of millions, damaged business relationships, a questioned reputation. But ignoring the warning, as absurd as it was, and being wrong, meant total annihilation. The cold wind on the helipad whipped at his face. He could taste the metallic tang of fear in his mouth, a taste he hadn't experienced in years. Logic screamed it was absurd, but the anomalous data point was flashing red in his brain, insistent as a fire alarm. He turned to the pilot, who was watching him through the cockpit glass with a confused expression. "Shut down the engines." Arthur's voice was firm, but his heart was hammering against his ribs. "I want a full check of the left turbine now." The pilot stared at him in disbelief, taking off his headset. Beatrice went white. "Arthur, this is insane. We'll miss the meeting, all because of a delusional street kid." "I didn't ask for your opinion, Beatrice," he replied, his tone so cold it left no room for argument. "I said check the engine." He walked over to Lily. The guards had released her but remained close. The girl looked at him, her face wet with tears but with a clear relief in her brown eyes. Arthur knelt in front of her. It was something he hadn't done in years. His knees cracked with the movement. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice low, urgent. The smell of dust and childish sweat filled his nostrils. "How did you know about the bolt?" "I don't know," Lily whispered, shrinking back. The words came out in broken sobs. I saw it in my head. The fire coming out of there." She pointed a trembling finger at the helicopter's left engine. As they spoke, the pilot and a mechanic, hastily summoned, opened the engine compartment. Arthur, Beatrice, and the guards watched in a silence so thick it felt solid. The clinking of tools echoed across the helipad. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then the mechanic stepped back from the turbine. His face was as white as wax. He walked slowly toward Arthur, his legs unsteady, holding something small and metallic in his trembling hand. It was a titanium bolt, one of the retaining bolts for the combustion chamber, and it was almost completely loose. "Oh my God," the mechanic's voice came out as a hoarse whisper. It was hanging on by a single thread, literally, with the vibration, the overheating. Another 10, maybe 15 minutes of flight. He swallowed hard. The turbine would have disintegrated. It would have been a catastrophic explosion. "Mr. Sterling, I don't know how this got past the last inspection. A deathly silence fell over the helipad. The cold wind seemed to mock them, whistling through the metal structures. Beatrice brought a hand to her mouth, horror etched on her face. The guards looked at each other, pale, their military training useless in the face of this revelation. Arthur felt the ground disappear from under his feet. He looked at the bolt in the mechanic's hand, then at the silent engine, and finally at the small figure in front of him, at the 5-year-old girl who, with an impossible warning, had just saved his life. Logic, data, probabilities. The entire foundation upon which he had built his existence crumbled to dust in that instant. Before him was a fact his mind couldn't process, but that his body, still trembling with adrenaline, knew to be the absolute truth. He had been minutes from death, and he had been saved by the most improbable messenger. He turned to Lily again. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look proud to be right. She just looked tired. An exhausted child who wanted to go home. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the thinness of her arms, the dirt caked on her bare feet, the grime under her nails, the dress that had once been pink but was now a faded, indeterminate color, And for the first time in a very, very long time, Arthur Sterling didn't see a liability or a variable in a spreadsheet. He saw a child who, somehow inexplicably, held a power his billions could never buy. At that moment, on top of his empire of glass and steel, the most powerful man in the city felt small, ignorant, and deeply in debt. He didn't know who this girl was, where she came from, or how she knew what she knew. But a certainty formed in his chest, a certainty as strong as the one he'd felt about his imminent death minutes before. His life and hers were now, from this moment on, irrevocably intertwined, and nothing would ever be the same. The sound of the titanium bolt dropping into the mechanic's palm echoed in the terrified silence of the helipad. It was the loudest sound Arthur Sterling had ever heard. A period at the end of the life he knew, and the prologue to a reality his logical mind refused to accept. He looked at the metal part, then at the helicopter's open engine, and finally at the small huddled figure that the security guards now regarded with a mixture of awe and reverence. Beatrice was pale, her mouth half open, the tablet with the data for the $100 million meeting forgotten in her hands. Her red lipstick was a stark slash against her pallor. "Sir," she stammered, her voice failing. We could have... I know what we could have been, Beatrice," Arthur cut in, his voice low and hoarse. The fury had given way to a kind of cold shock. He felt like a man who had just been pushed from the top of his own building, but had somehow survived the fall. "I know." Ignoring everyone around him, he walked to Lily. The girl was still crying softly, frightened by the commotion she had caused. Her small body trembled. He knelt again, this time not with the urgency of an interrogator, but with the hesitation of a man facing the inexplicable. "Don't cry." The words felt foreign, clumsy. He wasn't a man who offered comfort. He didn't know how. You saved us. It's okay now." But even as he said it, his mind was already racing. Who was this child? Where did this impossible knowledge come from? What else did she know? He stood up and made a decision that went against all his instincts for privacy and control. "Alonzo," he called his head of security, a 6'5" man with a scar on his chin. "Take the girl to my penthouse. Get her whatever she wants to eat, whatever she wants to drink, and do not let her out of your sight for 1 second." "Understood." Alonzo nodded, surprised but professional. Arthur turned to Beatrice. "Cancel the Hamptons meeting. Cancel my entire schedule for the rest of the week." His voice had a firmness that allowed no argument. "No calls, no meetings. The only priority right now is to find out who this child is and where she came from." The ride back down in the private elevator was even quieter than the ride up. Lily, now under the care of the immense but gentle Alonzo, looked at everything with wide eyes. Her fear was giving way to a childlike curiosity. To her, this glass box moving up and down was more fascinating than the helicopter. The reflections in the mirrored walls created infinite versions of herself. One small girl multiplied to infinity. In the penthouse, Arthur's order was followed to the letter. The private chef, Maria, alerted by Beatrice, prepared an impromptu feast. Grilled cheese sandwiches, warm chocolate cake, freshly squeezed orange and strawberry juice. Fruit cut into star shapes, but Lily barely touched the food. Seated in an Italian designer armchair that was worth more than a car, she seemed lost. "A small ghost in a glass palace. You're not hungry?" Arthur asked, sitting at a respectful distance. He held a cup of coffee that was growing cold in his hands. Lily shook her head. Her eyes were fixed on the window, searching for something outside. "I want my brother," her voice was a whisper. "And my mom. She's sick." The mention of family brought the situation back down to earth. This girl wasn't an oracle, an angel, or a paranormal phenomenon to be studied. She was a lost child, with a family that somewhere down in the city he lorded over needed her, was looking for her desperately, and he, Arthur, owed his life to her, a debt of a magnitude he couldn't even begin to calculate. "We're going to find them," Arthur said with a conviction that surprised himself. "What's your brother's name?" "Leo." A tear rolled down Lily's face. "He's 12, he's brave. And your mother? Where is she?" "At our house." Lily shrugged. "It's warm there, but she coughs a lot." Worry returned to her eyes, more intense now. Arthur summoned Alonzo. The security chief approached with silent steps despite his size. The girl said her brother's name is Leo. He's 12 and their mother is sick. Last she saw him was near our building. Arthur spoke quickly, his orders precise. Find them. Use every resource necessary. Be discreet. And bring them here, while Arthur's security team, more accustomed to tracking corporate rivals than families in the outer boroughs, began their search. Arthur found himself in the most uncomfortable position of his life, taking care of a child. He tried to entertain her. He showed her the 80-inch 8K television, the collection of abstract art that had cost millions, the climate-controlled wine cellar with vintages from 3 continents. Lily looked at everything with a bored politeness. The only thing that seemed to pique her interest was a small sculpture of a twisted metal bird, a piece of contemporary art he'd bought at a New York auction. It looks like the helicopter, she said, touching the piece with her small finger. The metal was cold. Have you ever seen one of those before, Lily? A helicopter? Arthur asked, trying to understand the source of the premonition. His analytical mind couldn't rest without answers. No, only in my head, she replied with the disarming simplicity of a child. The answer didn't satisfy him. His logical mind searched for patterns, causes, effects, correlations, some rational explanation. There was none. Only the inexplicable. The search for Leo and Lily's mother took 3 hours. 3 hours in which Arthur paced his penthouse, feeling an anxiety that wasn't about business or money. It was about an implicit promise made to a 5-year-old girl. A promise he was surprised to discover he could not break. The sun began to set, painting the sky orange and red. Finally, Alonso called. "Sir, we found them." The security chief's voice had a note of urgency. "They're in a makeshift shelter behind an abandoned theater in the Bronx, about 10 blocks from here. The boy, Leo, is desperately looking for his sister. He's even got the community police involved. The mother looks very sick, sir. The conditions are deplorable." "I'm on my way," Arthur said without hesitation. "Sir, perhaps it's better to bring them here. The place is not—" "No, Alonso. I'm going," his voice brooked no argument. "Get the car ready." The journey from the glass tower to the city's heart of poverty was a descent into a world Arthur only knew from statistics and reports, from NGOs his foundation supported for tax purposes. The luxury car, an armored Escalade, navigated potholed streets. The smell of sewage and smoke invaded even the hermetically sealed air conditioning. Barefoot children played soccer in the street. Women chatted on broken sidewalks. Stray dogs slept in the shade. It was a different country, just a few miles from his world. When the car stopped in front of the ruined theater, an old building with a peeling facade and broken windows, Arthur felt a deep unease. He, the man who lived in the sky, was about to enter someone else's hell. Alonso guided him through a side entrance. The place was a warren of cardboard, tarps, and scraps of wood, sheltering a few families the world had forgotten. It smelled of damp, mold, and despair. In a corner, lit by a single bare bulb hanging from a wire, he saw a thin boy, 12, maybe younger. His face was stained with tears and panic. He was describing his little sister to a community police officer who was taking notes in a worn-out notebook. It was Leo. "Leo!" Arthur called out. The boy turned suspicious. His eyes were the same as Lily's, brown and expressive. "Who are you?" "Your sister Lily is with me. She's safe," Arthur said, taking a step forward, his hands open. "I came to get you." The relief on Leo's face was immediate, but it was quickly followed by a wave of suspicion. "What do you mean she's with you? Where is she? What did you do to her?" "Well, she's at my home. It's a long story, but first—" Arthur paused. "First, I need to see your mother." Leo led him to an improvised cubicle, separated from the others by old curtains. The path was narrow, his expensive suit brushing against the dirty walls. The scene Arthur saw hit him harder than the near explosion of the helicopter. On a thin, filthy mattress on the floor, a young woman was lying. She couldn't have been more than 30, but she looked older. Her face was pale and sweaty. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, a wheezing sound with every inhale. The sound of her cough was weak, exhausted. It was Clara. "Mom, this man says Lily is with him," Leo whispered, kneeling beside the mattress. Clara opened her eyes with difficulty. They were brown, the same as her children's, but clouded by fever and pain. There was a residual beauty in her face, hidden beneath the suffering. Who are you?" she asked, her voice a thin thread. "My name is Arthur Sterling," he said, kneeling beside the mattress, not caring about the dirt or the smell of mold that permeated everything. "Your daughter, Lily. She saved me today. She saved my life. And I'm here to repay the debt." He took a deep breath. "I want to take you to my home. I have doctors, resources. I can help your mother get well." Clara and Leo stared at him, stunned. A billionaire here in their miserable shelter, offering help. It felt like a fever dream, a hallucination. "Why would you do that?" Clara asked, the natural suspicion of someone whom life had only taught to expect the worst. "Nobody does anything for free." "What do you want?" "Because I owe your daughter a debt I can never fully repay," Arthur said, and realized it was the absolute truth. "But I have to start somewhere. Please, let me help." The sincerity and desperation in Arthur's voice were undeniable. Clara, too weak to argue, and seeing the only chance to get help for herself and her children, nodded weakly. The operation was swift and efficient. In less than an hour, Clara was carefully transported on an improvised stretcher. Leo and Lily, finally reunited, hugged each other tightly. Back at the penthouse, Dr. Evans, Arthur's private physician, was already waiting. He was a competent and discreet man in his 60s. The diagnosis was quick and grim. "Severe bacterial pneumonia," Dr. Evans said, removing his stethoscope. "Aggravated by malnutrition. Her immune system is compromised. She needs intravenous antibiotics immediately. Hydration, nutritional support. A few more days without treatment and..." He didn't have to finish the sentence. Clara was immediately put on a treatment plan. A guest wing of the penthouse was transformed into a mini hospital room. While their mother slept under the effect of the medication, Leo and Lily explored their new environment, equal parts amazed and scared. They touched things with reverence as if they were in a museum. Arthur watched them. A broken family held together only by love and need, and he felt the weight of his new responsibility. Lily had saved his physical life, but maybe, just maybe, he could save this family's life in a different way. In the days that followed, Arthur's penthouse transformed. The deathly silence was replaced by the voices of children. Laughter echoed in hallways that had once only known the sound of solitary footsteps. Clara, under Dr. Evans' care, began to slowly recover. The color returned to her face. The cough subsided. Arthur found himself in a role he had never imagined, caring for people not out of obligation or calculated philanthropy, but because he genuinely cared. He read stories to Lily before bed. He tried to help Leo with math problems that the boy had learned on the streets, and surprisingly, solved with a brilliant, self-taught logic. He had long conversations with Clara when she felt stronger, and it was in those conversations that he learned their story. Clara was a widow. Her husband, Rodrigo, was a construction worker. He had died in a workplace accident 2 years earlier when a poorly secured beam fell on him, leaving her with 2 small children and no savings. No settlement, just debt, she had fought. She took cleaning jobs, sold candy on the street, anything. But her recent illness had completely knocked her down. "I thought I was going to die," Clara said one night, her voice still weak but firmer. "I thought my children would be left alone. And then Lily disappeared. And I thought I had lost everything." Tears streamed down her face. "You have no idea what that's like, to have nothing, to be unable to protect your children." But Arthur was beginning to imagine. For the first time in his life, he understood that some things were more valuable than money. Meanwhile, he tried to understand Lily's gift. He questioned her subtly. But there were no logical answers. The girl had no other premonitions. She was a normal, sweet, playful child. She liked to draw. She was afraid of the dark. She loved her family above all else. The vision of the helicopter had been a unique, inexplicable event. He had to accept, to the absolute horror of his rational mind, that there are things in the universe that cannot be put on a spreadsheet. But as this new, fragile family dynamic formed, as Arthur learned to smile genuinely, to laugh without calculating returns, as he discovered the simple pleasure of a child's hug, a shadow was moving in the depths. Because Arthur couldn't shake a question that hammered in his mind every night. Why was the helicopter bolt loose? Accidents happen. But that failure was too basic, too obvious, and the replacement part had just been installed. His business mind, trained for decades to identify risks and threats, patterns and anomalies, could not rest. Something was wrong. Something his predator's instinct smelled. He called Silas. Silas was a private investigator Arthur had used for sensitive corporate matters. A discreet, efficient man, unscrupulous when necessary. "Silas, I want you to investigate the maintenance of my helicopter," Arthur said on an encrypted call. "Every part, every mechanic, every supplier. I want to know why that bolt was loose, and I want to know yesterday." "Understood, Mr. Sterling. I'll leave no stone unturned." The peace in the penthouse was a fragile bubble, about to burst, because outside, in the world of high finance, Arthur's absence and the cancellation of his Hamptons meeting had generated speculation, and someone was taking advantage of it. Someone who had seen Arthur's near death not as a tragedy averted, but as a missed opportunity, and that someone was planning their next move. The first attack came in the form of a blind item in a financial gossip column. What reclusive tech billionaire, known for his cold-as-ice approach to business, abruptly cancelled a crucial trip and has been spotted in the city's poorest neighborhoods? Sources close to the Titan expressed concern over his sudden obsessive interest in a charity case. Whispers of a possible mental break or crisis of conscience after a minor incident with his aircraft have investors worried about the CEO's stability. The item was anonymous, but the intent was crystal clear: to paint Arthur as unstable, to undermine his credibility, to make the market doubt him. Arthur read the column and felt a cold fury rise in his spine. This was the work of a rival. But who? The answer came a week later in Silas's preliminary report, and when Arthur read it, his blood ran cold. Mr. Sterling, the replacement rotor part was supplied by Aerotech, a subsidiary of a shell company we've looked into before. What's more, the mechanic who performed the installation quit 2 days after the incident and has vanished. Off the grid. We're trying to locate him, but he knew how to disappear. Arthur sat down heavily. Aerotech, he repeated the name, his mind working at lightning speed. Check the majority shareholders of the parent company. The confirmation arrived hours later, and it was like a punch to the gut. The majority shareholder of the company that controlled Aerotech was Marcus Thorne. Marcus, the rival whose company Arthur had driven to bankruptcy in a hostile takeover 6 months prior. The man who, on the day he signed the liquidation papers, had looked Arthur in the eye and said, "You'll pay for this, Sterling, one way or another." The truth exploded in his mind like a bomb. It wasn't an accident, it was sabotage. Marcus Thorne had tried to kill him. That same night, as he processed the terrifying information, as he tried to decide what to do, Arthur received a message on his secure phone from an unknown number. There was no text, just a photo. It was a picture of Lily and Leo, taken with a long-range lens. They were playing in the small playground on the building's rooftop terrace, a place that was supposed to be impenetrable, inviolable. Below the photo, a single sentence: assets and liabilities. Sometimes, what you think is an asset can become your greatest liability. Be careful, Sterling. The phone slipped from Arthur's hands. His blood turned to ice. Marcus didn't just know that he had survived. He knew about the children. He knew Arthur cared about them, and he was using them as a threat. The bubble of security had been violently burst. The danger was no longer a memory. It was a real, present threat breathing the same air, and it was aimed at the new, fragile heart of his life, the family he had taken in. The debt he felt for Lily saving his life was about to be collected in a way he could never have imagined. And this time, there would be no warning. There would be no little girl with a premonition to save him. This time, he would have to fight. The anonymous message on Arthur's phone wasn't a threat. It was a declaration of war. The pixelated faces of Lily and Leo, captured by an enemy lens, turned the luxury penthouse into a glass prison. The sense of security that money and cutting-edge technology were supposed to provide shattered in an instant. The monster was no longer outside the gates. It was looking in, and its gaze was fixed on the two children, who had in a few short weeks become the center of Arthur's universe. Arthur's reaction was immediate, instinctive, and absolute. The calculating CEO gave way to the predator protecting its young. "Alonzo," he barked into the communicator, his voice so harsh that his head of security, a man accustomed to crises, felt a chill. "Total lockdown. No one enters or leaves this building without my express authorization." He paced, the phone pressed to his ear. "Double the security on all access points. I want 24-hour surveillance in the hallways, the garage, every elevator. The children do not leave this apartment under any circumstances. The terrace windows are to be locked and covered. We are at war." The atmosphere in the penthouse changed overnight. The lightness that had begun to bloom with the children's laughter was replaced by a palpable tension. Guards in dark suits and serious expressions now discreetly patrolled the halls. Their concealed but present weapons created a heavy energy. The curtains, once open to the stunning city view, now remained mostly drawn. Natural light was replaced by an artificial glow that cast a sickly yellow pallor on everything. Leo and Lily felt the change immediately. "Why can't we go to the playground, Arthur?" Leo asked, his face pressed against the glass, looking out at the now forbidden rooftop play area. "Its empty swings moved with the wind. We always played there." "It's just for a few days, champ," Arthur lied, hating himself for it. "I'm dealing with a problem at work." He saw the fear and confusion in their eyes. Guilt gnawed at him like acid. He had brought them into his life to save them from poverty and neglect, only to plunge them into a new kind of danger, one that was invisible but far more lethal. Marcus Thorne wasn't hunger or cold. He was an intelligent, ruthless predator, a man who calculated death like others calculated profit. Clara, recovering visibly every day, also noticed the change in Arthur. He barely slept. He spent his nights in his office in hushed conference calls. His shoulders were tense, his face illuminated only by the cold light of his screens. During the day, he was overprotective of the children, but also strangely distant, as if he feared his very presence could contaminate them with the danger that surrounded them. Meanwhile, Marcus's media offensive continued. The narrative he planted was subtle and venomous. Articles spoke of Arthur Sterling's erratic behavior since the helicopter incident. Anonymous sources expressed concern over his sudden and obsessive philanthropy, insinuating he was being manipulated by a family of opportunists. The story was skillfully crafted to paint Arthur not as a victim, but as a man who had lost his mind. An easy target for speculators, a source of instability for his own companies. The pressure was working. The board of directors at Sterling Financial started asking uncomfortable questions. Business partners called expressing concern. Investors demanded urgent meetings. Arthur's empire, built on a reputation of ruthless logic and control, began to tremble, because its leader was, for the first time, acting from the heart. Arthur's breaking point came on a rainy night, a week into the lockdown. He was in his office, staring at the city lights below. Rain streamed down the windows like tears. He felt more isolated than ever. The irony was crushing. He, the man who could buy anything, couldn't buy safety for the people he had grown to love. His wealth wasn't a shield. It was a target. His presence wasn't protection. It was a magnet for danger. The cold logic that had guided his entire life began to scream in his mind. The equation was simple and brutal. The risk variable was him. The threat was Marcus. The target, through him, was Clara's family. To eliminate the risk, he had to remove himself from the equation. He had to send them away. Far away, to a place where Marcus couldn't reach them, where they would be safe, even if it meant living without them. He made the most painful decision of his life. He would arrange new identities for them, buy them a house in another country, New Zealand maybe, or Canada. He would create a trust fund that would secure their future forever. They would be safe, and he would go back to being what he had always been, alone. The idea was logical, rational, the move of a chess grandmaster sacrificing his queen to save the game. And the thought of it broke him. When Clara entered the office that night, she found him standing with his back to her, watching the rain on the glass wall. His shoulders were slumped, defeated. "Arthur, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft. She was stronger now, the pneumonia completely gone, and the concern in her eyes was for him. "No, Clara," he said without turning. His voice was devoid of emotion, the same voice he'd used to fire Richard weeks before. "It's not okay. I've made a decision. He took a deep breath. You have to leave. Clara's heart dropped. Leave? To where? What happened? What happened is that I was a fool, he said, turning to face her. His face was a mask of self-control, but his grey eyes betrayed his agony. I thought I could protect you, that my money, my power would be enough. But I was wrong. He showed her the photo on his phone. The image of Lily and Leo in the playground. My presence in your lives isn't a shield. It's a danger. The man who tried to kill me now knows about you. And he won't hesitate to use you to get to me. He explained about Marcus, about the sabotage, and about the silent, deadly threat. I've already arranged everything. His voice was firm, but there was a crack in it. New identities. A house in Switzerland, far from everything. Enough money so you'll never have to worry again. You'll leave in 48 hours. It's the only way to keep you safe. Clara listened in silence. Her chin was up. Her brown eyes were fixed on his. When he finished, she didn't cry. She didn't plead. The woman he expected to crumble instead crossed her arms. No, she said. The word so simple, so final, caught him off guard. No. What do you mean, no, Clara? Frustration rose in Arthur's voice. You don't understand. You're in mortal danger. I understand perfectly, she replied, her voice calm but with a strength he had never heard before. What you don't seem to understand, Arthur, is that you don't get to make decisions for us anymore. We are not your employees. For your charity case, she took a step forward. We are your family, and families don't run when there's danger. They fight together. Fight? Arthur almost laughed, a bitter sound. Fight what, Clara? A man who hires killers? Who has no scruples? This isn't a street brawl. It's a game you can't win. Maybe not with your weapons, she said, stepping closer to him. Her eyes shone with determination. But we have ours. You pulled us out of misery, gave us a home, gave us health. You taught us not to be afraid of having no money. She placed a hand on his arm. Now let us teach you not to be afraid of men like Marcus. Running away is what he wants, for you to be isolated, to feel weak, for you to go back to being the lonely grey man you were before. Her voice softened, but was no less firm. We are not giving him that victory. Her words hit Arthur with the force of a revelation. He had spent his whole life fighting corporate battles, but this was a battle for his soul. And he had been about to surrender before it even began. This woman's strength, her refusal to be a victim, her unshakable faith in him and in their unity. It was the antidote to the poison of cold logic that was paralyzing him. What do you suggest we do then? He asked, his voice now uncertain, vulnerable. I suggest you stop trying to protect us from him, Clara said, and start fighting with us. You have Silas, the investigator. He found out about Marcus. Tell him to dig deeper. Her eyes shone with a practical intelligence. Men like Marcus always leave a trail. They always have other secrets. Find his weakness, and then use your power not to hide but to attack. In that moment, Arthur Sterling understood. True protection wasn't building higher walls. It was forging a sharper sword. Clara's courage was contagious. He looked into her eyes and saw not just love. He saw a partnership, an alliance. You're right, he said, a new wave of determination surging through him. No more hiding. No more fear. His voice regained the steely edge that had made him a titan of industry. This war won't be fought on his terms. It will be fought on mine. The next morning, the call to Silas was different. Silas, forget discretion. Arthur's voice was cold, precise. I want you to dismantle Marcus Thorne's life piece by piece. I want to know about every dirty deal, every offshore account, every enemy he's made along the way. He paused. And find that mechanic. I want him to talk. Use whatever it takes. The hunt began. Silas and his team, now with unlimited resources and a blank check, dove deep into Marcus's past, and what they found was even darker than Arthur had imagined. Marcus wasn't just a vengeful rival. He was a serial corporate criminal. There was a pattern: sabotage, blackmail, intimidation. 3 companies that had mysteriously failed after trying to compete with him. 2 executives who had died in convenient accidents. The key, as Arthur had predicted, was the mechanic. After 2 weeks of intense searching, Silas's team located him. He was hiding in a small fishing town in Florida, living under a false name, terrified. It took a few days, a guarantee of total protection, and a generous financial offer to make him talk. But when he did, the story he told was the weapon Arthur needed. The mechanic's confession, recorded in high-quality video and audio, was devastating. He admitted to being paid by Marcus to sabotage the helicopter, but the bombshell revelation was the motive. "It wasn't just revenge, Mr. Sterling," the mechanic said, his voice trembling on the video. He smoked nervously. "The plan was bigger. Much bigger." He looked directly into the camera. "He didn't just want you dead. He placed a massive short bet against your company's stock in the derivatives market. A gigantic bet. If you died, the market would panic. Sterling Financial's stock would plummet." The mechanic swallowed hard, and he would have made billions from the fall. It was the score of a lifetime. But there was more. The mechanic, fearing Marcus would betray him after the job, had kept evidence. Coded emails, records of wire transfers. And most importantly, he knew of someone else Marcus had used in the past for a similar job against another competitor. He gave them a name, a contact, another potential witness. Arthur now had everything: the motive, the method, the proof, and witnesses who could establish a criminal pattern. He had the ammunition to destroy Marcus Thorne. Not just in a court of law, but in the only place that truly mattered to men like him, the market. The battle plan was drawn up in the penthouse office, not just by Arthur and his lawyers, but with Clara's input. She didn't understand the financial jargon, but she understood human strategy, timing, where to hit to make it hurt the most. "He thinks your weapon is money, Arthur," Clara said, as they analyzed the data spread across the table. "But your real weapon is the truth, and the truth revealed at the right moment is more powerful than any fortune." They wouldn't go to the police first. That would lead to a long, drawn-out legal battle. Marcus would use the best, most expensive lawyers to create delays and find loopholes. The strategy would be a corporate and media blitzkrieg. The plan was brutally elegant. First, Arthur's team would use Silas's information to secretly contact the board members of Marcus's company, showing them the evidence of fraud and attempted murder. Second, at the same time, they would leak the information about Marcus's short bet against Arthur's stock to a renowned investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal. Third, the scandal would explode. Marcus's company stock would crash, and the board members, panicking and terrified of being associated with a criminal, would oust him from power. It would be a public checkmate, executed in the heart of his own empire. The night before the operation began, the family was gathered in the living room. Clara was reading a book to Lily, while Leo and Arthur played a game of chess. There was a calmness in the air, the calm before the storm. "Checkmate," Leo said, moving his bishop with a triumphant smile. Arthur looked at the board, surprised and genuinely impressed. The boy had beaten him, cleanly and elegantly. "You learned fast, champ." "Lily gave me the tip," Leo said, laughing. "She said you were so focused on attacking with your queen that you forgot to protect your king." Arthur looked over at Lily, who gave him a little wink. He laughed, a genuine, relaxed laugh. In that moment, he understood Clara's lesson. True strength wasn't in the power of a single piece. It was in how all the pieces worked together to protect the king. Later, after the children were asleep, he stood on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. Clara joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I am," he replied. "For the first time in a long time, I'm not fighting for a business. I'm fighting for us." He picked up his secure phone and called the head of his operations team. His voice was cold, precise. The voice of the predator he once was, but now used for a different purpose, a purpose of justice. "Initiate the operation. When the sun rises, I want Marcus Thorne to be a man without an empire." He paused. "I want him to have nothing." The war had begun, and this time, Arthur Sterling was not fighting alone. The operation began at dawn with the precision of a military strike. As the city awoke under a cold haze, Marcus Thorne's world began to burn. The first bomb was the media. His morning edition of the Wall Street Journal ran a devastating front-page story by the market's most feared investigative journalist. The headline was a knife to the heart. "The Vulture of Wall Street. Marcus Thorne's plot to profit from a rival's death." The article detailed, With documentary evidence and anonymous sources orchestrated by Silas's team, Marcus's plan to short Sterling Financial's stock after an accident claimed the life of its CEO. There were charts, numbers, a detailed timeline. It was all irrefutable. At 9 a.m., as Marcus arrived at his office, already in a panic after dozens of unanswered calls to his lawyers and advisors, the second bomb detonated. One by one, the inboxes of the board members of his own company, Thorn Industries, received an encrypted email. Inside was Silas's complete dossier. The mechanic's confession about the sabotage, the bank records of the bribe, the evidence linking Marcus to other cases of corporate espionage and eliminating competitors. It was a nuclear arsenal of information. In Arthur's penthouse, the mood was one of tense calm. A war room had been set up in his office. Screens displayed real-time stock quotes, news feeds, and secure communications. Arthur, Clara, and Leo watched in silence as Arthur's team, led by a crisis strategist named Victor, executed the plan. Lily was in another room with a tutor, shielded from the day's intensity. Thorn Industries stock is down 30% in the first hour of trading, Victor announced, his eyes glued to a blood-red graph. The journal article has created total panic. Investors are fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. The board has called an emergency meeting for 11 a.m., another operator said, typing furiously. I've received a copy of the agenda. Single item. Urgent measures regarding the conduct of the CEO. Clara squeezed Arthur's hand. She didn't understand the fine points of the stock market, but she understood the language of justice. What she was seeing wasn't revenge. It was the inevitable consequence of a wicked man's actions. At 10:30 a.m., Arthur's phone rang, an unknown number. He answered, putting it on speaker for everyone to hear. Sterling, you son of a bitch! Marcus's voice on the other end was a growl of fury and panic. What did you do? What did you do? I merely shined a light on the truth, Marcus, Arthur replied, his voice as cold as tempered steel. Apparently cockroaches don't like the light. You'll pay for this, Marcus screamed. I'll destroy you. You'll do nothing, Arthur interrupted with glacial calm. Your partners are abandoning you as we speak. Your lawyers are probably negotiating a deal to distance themselves from you right now. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. And if I were you, I'd look out the window. I think you have visitors. At that exact moment, police sirens began to wail outside the Thorn Industries building. The newspaper article and the anonymous tips, carefully coordinated by Arthur's team, had forced the authorities to act swiftly. It's over. Marcus, Arthur said, each word heavy and final. You bet against my life and you lost. Now enjoy the rest of yours. He hung up. The silence in the room was broken by Clara's sigh of relief. Leo, who had watched everything with a maturity beyond his 12 years, hugged his mother. The war was over. The monster had been defeated, not with violence but with truth, wielded like a surgical weapon. Marcus Thorn's fall was meteoric and absolute. Arrested and held without bail, facing an avalanche of criminal charges and civil suits, he lost his empire, his fortune, and his freedom. The attempted murder, the fraud, the sabotage, it all came to light, exposing one of the biggest corporate scandals of the decade. The news outlets feasted on it for months. With the threat permanently neutralized, a deep and true peace finally settled over Arthur's penthouse. The curtains were opened. The extra security was dismissed, and the sound that filled the home was the normal laughter and conversation of a family learning how to be one. Arthur's adoption of Leo and Lily was formalized without any further obstacles. The story, when presented to the family court judge, was so extraordinary that the magistrate waived many of the bureaucratic formalities, recognizing that the best interests of these children were, unequivocally, to remain with the man who had become their father in every way that mattered. And Clara became Clara Sterling 6 months later, in a quiet but emotional ceremony. They were now officially a family. Leo and Lily Sterling. Their lives found a new, sweet rhythm. Arthur, for the first time, learned how to be a father. He discovered the joy of helping with homework, the frustration of assembling a complicated toy, the peace of simply watching a movie on the couch with his children nestled beside him. He sold his majority stake in Sterling Financial, staying on only as chairman of the board, and began to devote his time and brilliant mind to a new kind of investment, his family's future. Clara became the heart of that home. She brought warmth, home-cooked meals, and a practical wisdom that balanced Arthur's analytical mind. She encouraged him to reconnect with his daughter Madison in Europe. The first few video calls, while awkward, were the beginning of healing a relationship he thought was lost forever. For Leo and Lily, she was the rock. The mother who always provided a safe harbor in the discovery of their new world. Leo, now 15, was a fascinating teenager. His street smarts, combined with the elite education he was receiving, turned him into a young man with a unique perspective on the world. He was the protective older brother, Arthur's confidant on matters of the heart that the tycoon didn't understand, and the link between their past of struggle and their present of privilege. And Lily, little Lily, the catalyst for it all, was a happy, vibrant girl. The premonition never returned. It was a singular event, an inexplicable miracle that had served its purpose and then receded, leaving behind a normal child who loved to draw, play with their golden retriever named Zeus, and listen to her mother's stories. The small, faint scar on her forehead, once a trigger of mystery, was now just a detail on her face, a silent reminder of the extraordinary journey that had brought them all together. About 3 years after Marcus's fall, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Arthur gathered the family in his library. "I've been working on a project," he announced, his eyes shining. "A project that I want to be our legacy. Our family's true legacy." He showed them the plans, blueprints, budgets, timelines, inspired by everything he had lived through, the danger, the redemption, the inexplicable miracle. He had decided to create the Flight of Hope Foundation. "Lily, you saved me from a flight that would have ended in death," Arthur said, looking at his daughter with an emotion he was no longer ashamed to show. "Now I want us to offer a different kind of flight to other people." The foundation would have 2 main focuses. The first, inspired by the courage of the mechanic who exposed Marcus, would be a legal and financial fund to protect and encourage corporate whistleblowers, people who had the courage to expose crime and corruption. The second and larger focus would be to build centers of educational excellence in underserved communities. They wouldn't be ordinary schools. They would be places focused on discovering and nurturing the unique talents of every child, especially those who didn't fit traditional molds. "The world is full of children like you, Lily," Arthur said, his voice thick with meaning. "Children with gifts that logic can't explain, with intelligences that normal schools don't know how to measure. I want to create places that aren't afraid of the inexplicable, that celebrate the unique potential in everyone." The final scene unfolds 5 years later, at the inauguration of the first Hope Campus, a modern, colorful educational complex built in the heart of one of the city's poorest communities in the South Bronx. The place was an oasis of technology and art, with science labs, music and painting studios, sports courts, and gardens where children could plant and learn about nature. Arthur, Clara, Leo, and Lily stood on the stage. The audience was a mix of city officials, donors, and most importantly, hundreds of children from the community. Children with eyes shining with hope and possibility. When it was Arthur's turn to speak, he looked at his family beside him. At Clara, the woman who had taught him that true strength comes from the heart, not a bank account. At Leo, the young man who showed him that intelligence comes in many forms. And at Lily, the girl who, with an impossible warning, had not just saved his life, but given him a reason to live it. "Years ago," he began, his voice echoing through the sound system. "I lived 1,500 feet above the world, isolated, alone. I thought that was strength." He paused. "Then a little girl, who had nothing but courage and love, taught me I was wrong. She showed me that true strength is in the connections we make, in the people we love, and in the responsibility we have to one another." Tears streamed down his face, and he didn't care. "This place exists because a child saved me, and now it is our responsibility to save other children, not just from physical dangers, but from a future without hope, from a world that doesn't see their value." He looked out at the hundreds of small faces in the audience. "Every one of you has a unique gift, a special talent, and this place exists to help you find it so that you can fly." When he finished speaking, the applause was deafening. But the moment Arthur would cherish forever was when Lily, now 10 years old, stepped up to the microphone. "My dad says I saved him," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But the truth is we saved each other. Because that's what family does. We save each other. Every day," she smiled. "And now, we're going to help save you too." That afternoon, as the community's children explored their new campus, running through the colorful hallways, laughing in the gardens, dreaming of futures that once seemed impossible, Arthur Sterling stood on a second-floor balcony, watching it all. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't calculating a return on investment. He wasn't measuring profits or losses. He was simply happy. He had started his journey as a man who saw the world in numbers, in assets and liabilities, and he had ended it as a man who understood that the most valuable things in life can't be measured at all. The love of a family, the grace of a second chance, the purpose of doing good. And it was all because of a 5-year-old girl who, in one impossible moment, saw the future and changed his forever. Sometimes, Arthur thought, miracles come in the most unlikely of packages, and sometimes saving someone is the only way to save yourself.